This is my true story. I thought I had rebuilt my life when I married again late in my years. I opened my home, my heart, and my finances to a woman I trusted, and I even welcomed her son as if he were my own blood. I believed loneliness had ended, that family had returned. But I was wrong. One day, I uncovered a betrayal so deep it shattered me. My stepwife with my son. They thought I was weak. They thought I would do nothing. But what I did next destroyed them completely. Before I tell you, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Please subscribe so my stories reach more people. Loneliness is a weight heavier than stone. After years of living alone, after watching my first marriage crumble into silence and distance, I believed my life would end in emptiness. My days were long, my nights were quiet, and the walls of my house echoed with nothing but memory. So when I met her, the woman who would become my stepwife, I thought it was a gift I did not deserve. She was warm, charming, and spoke to me with a gentleness that felt like sunlight after endless winter. I let her into my heart, slowly at first, then completely. Marriage, at my age, is not about passion. It is about companionship. I wanted someone to sit beside me at the table, to share coffee with in the morning, to hear my stories even if she had heard them before. She gave me that, or at least she pretended well enough. I married her believing I had finally escaped the shadow of loneliness. But my heart wasn't the only thing I opened. I opened my home. I gave her keys to everything that mattered. The house I had worked decades to pay off. The accounts I had built through years of careful saving. The investments I had protected like seeds for the future. I believed sharing was what marriage meant. If I held anything back, wouldn't that mean I didn't trust her? And trust, I thought, was the very foundation of family. She brought her son from a previous marriage into our lives. He was grown, younger than my own boy, but still lost in the world. I told myself I would treat him as my own. Blood or no blood, family was family. I gave him advice. I gave him money when he asked. I even introduced him to people who could help him with work. He called me Dad sometimes, and though the word tasted strange at first, I allowed it to settle in my heart. I thought I had rebuilt something precious, a family. When I saw them smile at the dinner table, when I heard their laughter in the living room, I let myself believe it was real. I told myself the ache of the past was gone, that I had finally found peace. I even updated my will to include them, thinking that when I was gone, they would live securely, protected by the sacrifices I had made. That was my mistake. I mistook their acceptance for love, their presence for loyalty. Still, I gave freely. I covered bills without question. I bought gifts without hesitation. I listened to their problems, offered solutions, gave them shelter, gave them stability. My savings became our savings. My home became our home. My future became theirs to inherit. I believed it was the right thing to do, that generosity would breed respect, that kindness would be repaid with loyalty. At night, when I looked at her beside me and thought of him sleeping under my roof, I felt proud. Proud that I had not allowed bitterness to harden me. Proud that I had opened my arms to people who weren't bound to me by blood but whom I still called family. I thought this was redemption, the second chance at life I had been waiting for. But I did not realize then that trust, in the wrong hands, is not a gift. It is a weapon. And I had just placed that weapon in their hands. At first, it was small things, the kind you brush aside because you don't want to believe they matter. A glance that lingered too long between them. A laugh that seemed private, shared in a way that left me standing on the outside. I told myself not to be paranoid. I told myself family sometimes grows close in ways that look unusual but are harmless. But deep inside, a seed of doubt began to grow, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't kill it. My stepwife, once so attentive, began to give excuses for her absences. She would leave the house late in the evening, saying she needed to visit a friend or run errands. When I asked questions, her answers came too quickly, too smooth, like lines rehearsed in advance. My son, too, changed. He avoided my eyes at the table, answering me with short phrases while sharing long conversations with her. When I walked into a room, sometimes they would fall silent, exchanging looks that made my chest tighten. I remember one evening clearly. I had returned from the garden, dirt still on my hands, and as I opened the door, I heard their voices, low, hushed, urgent. The moment they realized I was inside, the conversation stopped. My stepwife came into the kitchen, smiling too brightly, asking if I wanted tea. My son stayed in the living room, staring at the floor. I nodded, but inside, I felt the first real crack in the world I had built. Nights grew colder, not because of the weather, but because of the distance. In bed, she would turn away from me, her phone glowing in her hand as she typed messages she claimed were for family matters. I pretended to believe her. I rolled over and closed my eyes, but sleep rarely came. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint buzz of her notifications, each one a reminder that something was slipping away. Meals became quiet affairs. The laughter that once filled the table was gone. I would ask about their day, and their answers would be clipped, distracted. Sometimes I would catch them exchanging quick glances, as though deciding what story to tell. Other times, they would share jokes that left me excluded, laughing at things I wasn't meant to understand. It was like living in a house where the walls had shifted overnight, where doors no longer opened to me. I dismissed my suspicions at first. I told myself it was nothing, that perhaps I was imagining things, that my old age was making me paranoid. After all, hadn't I built this family with love? Hadn't I given them everything? Why would they betray me? I clung to the belief that loyalty still meant something, that respect still had value. But respect cannot be forced, and loyalty cannot be faked forever. Then came the stares. Cold stares across the table, quick ones when they thought I wasn't looking. My son, the boy I had treated as my own, now looked at me like a stranger intruding on his space. My wife, the woman I had trusted with my home, now looked at me like a burden she wished she could shed. Those stares spoke louder than words. And though I tried to bury my doubts, the truth has a way of rising. Each whisper I overheard, each excuse I accepted, each glance I caught, they piled on top of one another until denial became impossible. The family I thought I had rebuilt was crumbling, not from the outside, but from within. Still, I stayed silent. I convinced myself it was better not to know, better not to dig. But the truth does not wait forever. One day, it would step into the light. And when it did, it would not just wound me, it would shatter everything. The truth revealed itself not with whispers or glances, but with a blow so sharp it felt like the air had been ripped from my lungs. I had lived with doubt gnawing at me for months, convincing myself I was imagining things, telling myself that the family I had built could not betray me. But one evening, when the shadows were long and the house was too quiet, I walked into a room and saw what no man should ever have to see. I had gone to my study to find a book, something to occupy my restless mind. The door was ajar, and as I pushed it open, I froze. There they were, my stepwife and my son, together in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Her hands where they did not belong, his face close to hers, their bodies entwined in betrayal. For a moment, my heart refused to believe what my eyes were seeing. I stood there, gripping the doorframe, my breath caught in my throat. My knees trembled as though the ground beneath me had given way. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was treachery. In my own home, under my own roof, with the very people I had trusted most. When they realized I was standing there, the silence was louder than any scream. My stepwife's face drained of color, her lips parting in shock but finding no words. My son, my own blood, had the audacity to look defiant at first, his jaw clenched as if daring me to speak. But then his eyes wavered, guilt creeping in, shame he could not mask. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to shake them until the lies spilled out, but no sound came. My throat burned, my chest tightened, and all I could do was stare. Stare at the woman I had married late in life, the woman I had trusted with my home and my heart. Stare at the boy I had raised as my own, the boy I had fed, clothed and guided, now standing as the ultimate betrayer. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until my stepwife finally whispered, "It's not what it looks like." But her voice cracked, her eyes betraying her. And in that moment, I knew lies could not cover this. No excuse, no explanation, no apology could erase the truth standing before me. Humiliation washed over me in waves. I felt stripped bare, not just as a husband, but as a father, as a man. My house, the place I had built with my hands and my sweat, had become the stage of my own destruction. The people I had trusted most had made me a fool under my own roof. I staggered back, my hand pressed against the wall to steady myself, the weight of betrayal crushing me until I could barely breathe. Neither of them moved to comfort me. Neither of them spoke. They stood frozen, caught in their own treachery, watching as I turned and walked away. My legs carried me to the kitchen, where I sat alone at the table, staring at the wood grain as if it could offer answers. My hands shook. My stomach churned. I could not eat. I could not think. All I could do was sit in the ruins of everything I thought I had. That night, I did not sleep. I wandered through the house, every corner tainted now with the memory of betrayal. The laughter I once cherished echoed in my head like mockery. The smiles I once trusted now felt like masks. And the roof above me, once my shelter, now felt like a cage. The truth had finally revealed itself, and it shattered me completely. That night, after the truth revealed itself, I sat alone at the table while the house around me seemed to shrink. I had no appetite, yet I forced myself to put food on a plate, only to sit and stare at it as it went cold. The same hands that had cooked countless meals for them now trembled as I lifted the fork. Every bite turned to ash in my mouth, so I set it down and simply sat there, listening to the clock tick on the wall. Each tick echoed like a reminder of what I had lost. Not money, not possessions, but trust. I replayed everything in my mind, every sacrifice I had made for them. I thought of the nights I stayed up late, crunching numbers to ensure the bills were paid. I thought of the days I dipped into my retirement savings to cover emergencies they claimed were urgent. I thought of the vacations I paid for, the gifts I bought, the endless stream of money that left my account, but never seemed to be enough for theirs. Every dollar I had given was meant to build a family. And yet, sitting there alone, I realized they had never seen me as a husband or a father figure. They had seen me as a wallet, a provider, a resource to drain until there was nothing left. I had mistaken dependence for love. I had confused comfort for loyalty. And now I was paying the price. Sitting in my own house like a stranger, humiliated by the very people I had built my life around. I thought back to my stepwife's smile when I first gave her keys to the house. At the time, I believed it was gratitude, maybe even love. Now I saw it for what it was: triumph. The smile of someone who had secured her future, not with loyalty, but with calculation. My son, too, had played his role well. He called me Dad when he needed something. He laughed at my jokes when there was money on the line. But the moment I caught them, the moment the mask slipped, there was no love, no respect, only shame and silence. I sat in that silence, humiliated in a way words cannot fully capture. Betrayal is not just about broken vows or hidden lies. Betrayal is about being made into a fool. I had given them everything, and they had taken it all while mocking me behind closed doors. I wasn't a husband in her eyes. I wasn't a father in his. I was an old man with resources to strip away until nothing remained. And yet, even as I sat there humiliated, something inside me began to change. Humiliation, when endured long enough, can transform into something sharper. I realized that my weakness was not in giving them everything. It was in believing they valued it. They had made me believe I was powerless, but they had forgotten one simple truth. Every house deed, every account, every investment was still mine. They had access, but not ownership. They had proximity, but not power. That night, I stopped being the victim of betrayal and started becoming the architect of revenge. As I sat in the silence of that night, humiliation still burning in my chest, a single thought began to grow stronger with each passing hour. They thought I was weak. They looked at me as an old man too tired to fight, too broken to resist. They believed that because they had my trust, they had my power. But they had forgotten something critical. Everything, every dollar, every deed, every investment was still mine. The house they slept in carried my name on the deed. The accounts they depended on for groceries, vacations, and indulgences were built with my years of work, and though I had given them access, I had never handed them full control. The cars in the driveway were purchased under my credit. The investments they bragged about to friends were seeded with my savings. They had grown arrogant, blinded by their betrayal, and in that arrogance they had overlooked the truth. I still held the keys. I thought of the paperwork stacked neatly in my study drawers, the legal documents signed with my name alone. I remembered the conversations with my lawyer years ago, when he advised me to keep certain assets separate, just in case. At the time, I saw it as unnecessary caution, but now I realized it was the lifeline I needed. They believed they had me cornered, but in reality, they were living inside a world I built, a world I could take back at any moment. The more I thought about it, the stronger I became. They thought betrayal had left me powerless, but it had only sharpened me. I was not too old to act. I was not too broken to fight. In fact, I had something they lacked: patience. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to confront them with rage. I needed only to move quietly, carefully, the way a shadow moves just before it swallows the light. That realization gave me a strange kind of peace. For the first time since I caught them, I no longer felt trapped. I began to see their smirks, their whispers, their arrogance, not as proof of my weakness, but as proof of their blindness. They had grown so sure of themselves that they had left me the perfect opportunity. They thought they had stolen my dignity. But what they didn't know was that I was about to steal back everything they depended on. I whispered into the dark, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. You took my trust. But you forgot. I still hold the power. Revenge doesn't need noise. It doesn't need anger spilling across the table or shouting in the hall. Real revenge is quiet, patient, and precise. That night, after realizing I still held the power, I began to form my plan. Not out of impulse, not out of wild rage, but out of cold calculation. They had played me for a fool, but now I would show them what it meant to underestimate a man who had built his life with his own hands. The first step was simple: call my lawyer. Not in the morning, not when they could overhear me, but late at night when the house was still and betrayal slept soundly in the rooms upstairs. I sat in my study with the door closed, the lamp burning low, and dialed his private number. When his familiar voice answered, I wasted no time. I told him everything. Not about the betrayal of hearts, but about the betrayal of money, about the access they had, the joint accounts, the cards, the investments. I told him I wanted it all back, quietly and legally. He didn't hesitate. He knew me too well, knew I wouldn't call at that hour unless it was serious. We can do this, he said. We'll move slowly, but we'll move thoroughly. By the time they realize, it'll be too late. His words steadied me. This was not just revenge, this was strategy. Together, we mapped the steps. Transfer funds from joint accounts into ones under my sole name. Revoke authorizations tied to my credit. Close secondary cards I had given them for convenience. Freeze investment withdrawals until only I could approve them. Piece by piece, line by line, we dismantled the empire they thought was theirs. Every dollar they leaned on, every safety net they believed was secure, was drawn back into my hands. I worked with precision. I gathered documents, signed papers, double-checked balances. Each signature was like a nail in the coffin of their comfort. Each stamped approval was another door closing behind them. I felt no hesitation. My humiliation had burned away all doubt, leaving behind only clarity. I didn't speak a word of it to them. At breakfast, I sat at the table, silent, sipping my tea as my stepwife scrolled through her phone, and my son muttered excuses about where he would be that day. They didn't notice the faint smile at the corner of my lips because arrogance had blinded them. They still believed I was the same broken man they had humiliated. They didn't see that every morning, while they plotted in whispers, I was dismantling their world one document at a time. The beauty of the plan was its invisibility. No shouting, no scenes, no accusations, just quiet actions behind closed doors, actions they would not notice until their cards were declined, until their bills went unpaid, until the walls they thought were unshakable collapsed around them. By the end of the week, everything was ready. Every account was secured. Every access point was revoked. The power they thought they held was gone, pulled back into the hands of the man they had called weak. And as I placed the final signed paper back into its folder, I whispered to myself, "You betrayed me in silence. Now I will destroy you in silence." It started with small cracks, the kind they thought were mistakes. My stepwife went to the store one morning, her usual basket of luxuries in hand, and when she swiped the card, it was declined. She frowned, tried again and again, until the cashier gave her the kind of look reserved for people pretending to have wealth they no longer owned. She came home irritated, tossing the card onto the table, muttering that the bank must have made an error. My son laughed, assuring her it would sort itself out. I sat in my chair, silent, sipping my tea, knowing it was no error. It was the beginning. 2 days later, the phone calls began. Creditors asking about overdue payments, accounts that had once been smooth, now suddenly frozen. The joint account they depended on for groceries and bills was empty, drained into places only I controlled. When she tried to withdraw cash, the machine spat her card back out. When he tried to pay for gas, the pump rejected his swipe. Their confusion grew, their frustration bubbled, but they never once looked at me. They were so certain of their grip on me that they never imagined I had slipped free and taken everything back. Soon, the cracks widened into holes. Bills went unpaid. Mortgage notices arrived, stamped in red. The cars they flaunted were suddenly on the verge of repossession. Their phones buzzed with alerts, each one another piece of their empire collapsing. They argued in hushed voices, panic seeping through their once confident tones. I walked past their closed doors at night, hearing them blame each other, their whispers sharp like knives. By the end of the week, it was no longer whispers, it was shouting. My stepwife's voice, once calm and calculated, was shrill with desperation. "Where is the money? What happened to the accounts? How are we supposed to live?" My son, arrogant as ever, tried to mask his panic with anger, pounding on tables, insisting it was just a glitch. But his eyes betrayed him. He knew something larger was at play. And all the while, I remained calm. At dinner, when they barely touched their food, I ate slowly. When they questioned me about the bank, I shrugged and said perhaps they should call the branch. When they muttered about betrayal, I stayed silent, watching as the weight of their own betrayal began to crush them. Then the final blow came. A letter arrived. Foreclosure notice on the house. The place they thought they owned, the roof under which they betrayed me, was mine alone in the eyes of the law. And now, with payments defaulted and accounts frozen, it was slipping away from them. My stepwife opened the letter at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. My son snatched it from her, reading it twice, 3 times, his face draining of color. For the first time, silence fell between them. Not the silence of schemes, but the silence of defeat. I sat back in my chair and spoke only once. "You thought I was weak. You thought I would never act. But everything you lived on was mine, and now it is gone." The betrayal that began in shadows had ended in daylight, not with me humiliated, but with them stripped bare. Their world had collapsed, not from chance, not from bad luck, but from the quiet hand of the man they mocked. It didn't take long before the silence of their panic turned into noise at my door. One evening, as I sat in my study with the lamp glowing low, they came storming in together. My stepwife's face pale with fury, my son's jaw tight with desperation. They didn't knock. They didn't ask permission. They burst in as though I owed them something. Her voice was the first to break the air. "What did you do?" she demanded, her tone shrill, shaking with fear. "The accounts are empty. The cards don't work. The bank says everything is closed." "Tell us the truth." My son slammed his fist on the desk, rattling the papers I had neatly stacked. His eyes burned with anger. "You ruined us, old man. Do you think this is funny? Do you think you can just take everything back after all these years?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands calmly across my lap. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I looked at them the way a man looks at strangers. Not family, not loved ones, just people who had overstayed their welcome. And when I finally spoke, my words were cold enough to freeze the air around us. "You took my trust," I said slowly. "I took back everything else." They both went silent for a moment, the weight of my words pressing down on them. My stepwife's lips trembled as though she wanted to argue, but no sound came. My son, still defiant, stepped closer, his voice cracking with rage. "You can't just walk away from us. You think you're clever, but you'll regret this. You're nothing without us." I almost laughed at that, but instead I stood, my chair creaking against the floorboards. I walked past them, not rushing, not afraid, but steady, each step deliberate. I paused at the door and turned to face them one last time. "I gave you a home," I said. "I gave you comfort, respect, and loyalty. And in return, you gave me betrayal. Did you really think there wouldn't be a cost?" My stepwife's eyes filled with tears, but not of regret, of fear. Fear of losing the life she had built on my back. My son's face twisted, not with shame, but with the realization that he had lost control. They thought they had power over me. But now, standing before them, I could see the truth in their eyes. They were powerless. Without waiting for their reply, I left the study, their voices calling after me, demanding explanations, begging for reversal. But I didn't look back. They had made their choices in the shadows. I had made mine in the light of truth. And now, their collapse was complete. The night after their screams rattled the walls of my study, I sat alone in my room, the decision already made. I had taken back every dollar, every deed, every piece of power they thought belonged to them. They had nothing left to cling to but each other, and even that bond was poisoned by the shame of what they had done. But for me, staying there any longer was pointless. That house, once my pride, was nothing more than a graveyard of betrayal. I would not live among ghosts. I would not breathe the same air as those who had stabbed me in the back. So, before the sun rose, I packed a single suitcase. I didn't need much. A few clothes, some documents, the essentials. I had spent a lifetime gathering things, but I realized now that peace does not come from possessions. Peace comes from freedom. And freedom meant walking out without leaving a trace. I moved quietly, not because I feared them, but because silence was the final insult. No arguments, no farewells, no explanations, just absence. I left their photographs on the walls, their voices in the air, their guilt in the rooms they once strutted through. I took only what was mine, the money I had secured, the dignity they thought they had stolen, and the strength to never look back. By the time the first light of dawn touched the windows, I was gone. A cab waited at the corner, its engine humming softly, unaware of the weight it was carrying, not in luggage, but in finality. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk, sat in the back seat, and watched as the house I had built and filled with trust disappeared in the rearview mirror. For years, that house had been my sanctuary. Now it was just bricks and betrayal, a cage I had broken open with my own hands. At the airport, I paid cash for a one-way ticket. I didn't tell the clerk where I was heading until the last moment, and even then, I spoke with the certainty of a man who knew he would never return. No forwarding address, no phone number, no email, nothing. They would search, perhaps. They would call relatives, knock on doors, send desperate messages. But every question would echo into silence. For the rest of their lives, They would never know where I had gone, only that I had left them with nothing. As the plane lifted into the sky, I looked down at the city shrinking below. Somewhere in that maze of streets sat my stepwife and my son, waking to the cold reality of their new life. Their credit cards would fail. Their bills would pile up. Their friends would vanish once the money was gone. And they would know, with every hungry night and every unpaid debt, that I was the one who had stripped them bare. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and let the hum of the engines wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. Betrayal had chained me, but revenge had freed me. And now, as I disappeared into the horizon, I knew I would never again be their victim. Justice doesn't always thunder with applause. Sometimes it whispers, quiet and cold, carried not in words, but in absence. That was my justice. I didn't wait for them to beg. I didn't wait for apologies that would never come. I didn't wait for them to understand the weight of what they had done. I left them to face the ruins of their choices, empty-handed and hollow-hearted, while I walked away with everything that mattered. In the weeks that followed, I heard through distant whispers that their world collapsed quickly. Without access to my money, the house fell into debt. Without the power of my name, their friends drifted away. Creditors circled, neighbors whispered, and the family they thought they had fooled finally turned their backs. My stepwife, once proud, now lived in the shadow of shame. My son, once arrogant, now stumbled through life with nothing to show but betrayal. They were trapped in the mess they had created, forced to feed on the lies they once fed me. And me? I lived quietly, far from them, in a place where no one knew my story and no one knew my scars. My mornings were simple: coffee, sunlight, the sound of birds instead of arguments. My nights were peaceful. No whispers behind doors, no cold stares across the table, no weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. I found freedom not in wealth, though I still held it, but in distance. Distance from the people who tried to break me. Distance from the poison they poured into my life. I often thought about the word they left me with: curse. That's what they made me feel like, a burden, an old man to be tolerated until I was gone. But the truth is, I was never the curse. I was the blessing they squandered. I gave them everything, and they betrayed me. And when they betrayed me, I gave them silence. Silence that took back their comfort. Silence that left them with nothing. Silence that would haunt them longer than any words I could have spoken. That was my justice. Not screaming, not violence, just truth and silence. I don't know if they still sit in that empty house, wondering how it all slipped away. I don't know if my son thinks of me when he struggles to pay his bills, or if my stepwife regrets the night she chose betrayal over loyalty. But I do know this: they will never forget the day the ground disappeared under their feet, the day they learned that the man they called weak was the man who held all the power. Final thought: they betrayed me with lies. I betrayed them with truth and with silence.